Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have an extremely knowledgeable guest on today, Todd Cherches, and we are going to have a really interesting conversation that's a little different than we usually do. Instead of diving deep into one topic, we're going to talk about lots of topics under the umbrella of visual leadership. And so, like Todd has taught me through reading his book that apparently I am a very visual person and I think I prefer visual leadership myself. So I'm very excited to talk about this and talk about how this really applies to our leadership, our coaching, and our lives, right? So before we jump in, I want to welcome you to the show, Todd.
Thanks, Becca. It's great being with you. You had my friend Eduardo Brasino on, who wrote an amazing book on the performance paradox, which is how I came across you. So it's great for us to be talking today.
Yeah. I'm excited. So I'd love for just to briefly share what has been your journey through your career that has led you to what you're doing now within leadership.
Sure. Well, as I talk about my TED Talk on the power of visual thinking, people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would say Superman. And they said, "Well, if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan?" I said Batman. So as a kid, working in television was my dream. But when I grew up, I realized I couldn't be a superhero, but I figured I could work in television. So I grew up in New York and I worked in advertising for a year, but then I moved to LA and Hollywood. And I worked in a number of different jobs in TV production, casting. I worked for Disney. I worked for CBS developing TV shows. Then I was a project manager in the theme park business, which I talk about a little bit, my China project in my TED Talk. But what the common theme was in all of these jobs was storytelling and using visual imagery. And I was thinking, even though people assume I was a business major because of what I do as an executive coach, I was actually an English literature major with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. So weaving in the arts and the humanities and literature and television into what I do, I teach leadership at NYU in Columbia, and I do executive coaching and leadership development, but all with a visual leadership, visual thinking, visual communication orientation or methodology. So that's how that all kind of comes together.
I love this so much. And your book was so enjoyable to read because it was so visual. And I think that was one of I think I always knew I was as a visual learner, but to have such a visual book was like, oh, another page I love. It was just like actually, just really enjoyable. So
Thank you.
I want to,
I wrote the kind of book that I like to read. So all the chapters are
yes.
around 3 to 5 pages. Each chapter starts with a visual and ends with a thought box question.
Yeah.
So we're all visual learners and visual thinkers. That's just how our brains are wired. But I kind of like just blew it up and said, let's just focus on how we can use visuals to be more effective.
I love it. I love it so much. So I want to jump in because there's about 10 topics I want to cover with you. It's going to be like the lightning round here.
Yes.
So, first of all, I want to just, get kind of down in the room. What is visual leadership and why is it actually important that we talk about it and we learn about it?
Sure. So first of all, our brains are wired visually. We take in information through our eyes, but also mainly through our brains, right? We see things with our eyes, but we process them through our brains, and it's just the way our brains are wired. So visual leadership is the application of visual thinking processes to the practice of leadership and management. So I break it down to 4 different categories, what I call the 4 ways to think and communicate visually. And and I do whole workshops on each one. So this is the real speed version, as we talked about. So category 1 is using visual imagery, and that could be props, that could be PowerPoint slides, that could be visual language. Anytime you paint a picture with words, that is using visual imagery, words or images. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks. So a pyramid, a 4-box matrix, a step ladder. Anytime you put something into a diagram or any kind of framework, that is category 2. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy, so using visual imagery to communicate or explain something. And then category 4 is using storytelling with humor, bonus points for humor if and when appropriate, because when you incorporate humor and people are feeling good and laughing, they're more innovative, they're more open and receptive to learning. So those are the 4 buckets. And when used in combination, it's even more effective. So that's the tip of the iceberg, which is a metaphor or idiom. That's the tip of the iceberg version of why visuals and how they are so important and how they could be used in our everyday conversations and
I
communication.
love this. And actually, as you're talking, it made me think of some of the work that I do with school leaders in terms of rolling out initiatives.
Mm.
Something I started doing years ago was when they would name, I'd say, okay, what are all of your initiatives? Right. And it's in schools, we get this thing where it's like, hey, math's important. Wait, and reading. Wait, and
Yeah.
STEM. Wait, and they're like all the, and then there's like 10 initiatives, right?
Yeah.
So I actually had them create an analogy and a
Mhm.
graphic to show their staff how all of it works together in the relationship. I've had a plate of food as one of the
Mm.
analogies, or a goldfish bowl as
Oh,
one
I
of the
love that.
analogies.
Yeah,
So
those are great.
anyway,
Great
that's
books.
yeah, yeah. I didn't realize I was doing visual leadership.
Yeah,
That's
you're
really
doing
cool.
all of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, life is, if you think about it, life is so complex and messy. And it's like,
Mhm.
my mantra is, how do you get people to see what you're saying? Right. So
Yeah.
we have an image or we have a picture in our mind that's crystal clear, or maybe it's not. But then when we communicate to other people, if they don't get it, one of my other sayings is that people are not mind readers. So if they don't understand what you're saying, whose fault is that? Right. I was
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
restaurant and I asked for some more ice for my drink, and they brought me a bowl of white rice. So I said ice, they heard rice. So it's like, whose fault was that? And what could I have done differently to get what I wanted and needed? Because you can't blame the other person if you didn't communicate it properly. So again, there are
Mm.
different ways to communicate that so people can understand what we're saying more effectively. So I love that you're using anything from color coding to creating a framework and metaphors to explain something so people get it and we're all on the same page.
Yeah. One of the things I often say is it doesn't matter what you say, it matters what they hear.
Exactly.
And I think visual leadership is a tool in the toolbox of making sure people hear what we're saying. And often if there's communication breakdowns in a school, it's often there's some mindset around leadership and coaches, which is, well, I
Right.
told them to do it. And I'm like, did they hear it? Right? Did
Exactly.
they actually understand? Are they invested in what you said? So
And even when you
I
said
love
a
this.
tool in your toolbox, that's a metaphor,
Mhm.
right? So we use
Yes.
metaphors and analogies. I'm so attuned to it, like I pluck them out of the air as they happen. I notice your rainbow color-coded bookshelves behind you.
Yes.
So it's like when you're a visual thinker, you notice things. It's really about having a hyper sense of awareness. And when you notice things, you learn, you pick up things, and then you're able to communicate better with other people. So yeah, so I'll leave it at that, but definitely.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And those of you that are listening to the podcast and not watching the video, we do have the video up on YouTube. But if you are listening to the podcast, my books are color coded,
Mhm.
and so and I recently did that because I couldn't find my books and I could remember what color the book was. So I
Yeah,
decided I'm putting all the red books together.
love that. Love that.
Yeah. So I want to jump into the content of the book. It has so many models and frameworks and ways of thinking about leadership. So the first one I loved is you have three continuums that spell CAP: confidence, assertiveness, and presence. And I'd love you to share, what do those continuums mean? Why do we want to know them as leaders? And I really loved the 12 C's of presence.
Thank you. Well, we don't have time to go into all 12 C's, but we'll touch. So
Yeah.
cap, I call it put your cap on. And the way this model evolved was one of my clients, the CEO, had a meeting with his financial people. He asked a question and no one responded. But then when they went back to their offices, they all emailed him their response. And it turned out they didn't not have the knowledge, they didn't have the confidence to speak up and speak out in front of their peers and in front of him. So I said what they lacked was the confidence to speak up, the assertiveness, and then they didn't have the executive presence. So it just hit me, and that model just came together as, in order to be effective and have I impact and influence, you need to have the confidence and your belief in yourself, the assertiveness to speak up and speak out, and the presence to have to command a room or to have communicate with authority. So it's basically a scale where you score yourself from 0 to 10 in C, A, and P. Now the trick of this is if someone says, "Oh, I'm a 10 in all three," well, that's not good either because it's too much of a good thing, right?
Mhm.
If you're too confident, you're overconfident. If you have too much assertiveness, you may be seen as aggressive. And if you have too much presence, you may be seen as domineering. So you really want to be in like the 7 to 8 range, right? And be able to dial it up and dial it back. So that's kind of like the trick of the model. So what's interesting when you use it as a 360, when people self-evaluate but have other people score them, you can see the gaps, right?
Mhm.
I may
Mhm.
think I have a 8 in presence, but you may say I only have a 3. So
Yeah.
what's the feedback there, and what can I do to bump that up from a 3 to an 8? So that's in a nutshell, which is an idiom or metaphor. That's the summation. And the 12 C's of presence are, what does charisma mean? What confidence, communication, and there's 12 different words that start with C. That if you enhance each of those, you will boost your confidence, assertiveness, and your presence in any situation.
That's really great. I love that. And you said something that I want to highlight, the the influence and impact. And it just, occurred to me, like, isn't that the point of leadership? right? Like a
Exactly.
healthy leader wants influence and impact. And then that actually brings me into, you talk about the three types of power. And academically, I've only read research around two types of power, and I loved your third type of power. I was like, this is great. So there's the traditional positional power, your role gives you power, and then there's the personal power, which is how your ability to influence other
Mhm.
people, right? So that's the I piece. And then you say there's a third type of power, relational power, and I'm so into this. So I'd love you to share with everyone, what is relational power and what's its relationship with the other two powers.
Yeah, relational power is who you know and who knows you and who wants to
Mhm.
know you, right? So
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
lot of times we think personal power very often has a negative connotation, right? Because
Mhm.
power is very often misused and abused. But if you think of power as influence, and if you the metaphor I use is look at a light socket on the wall, right? It's just potential power because it's dormant until you plug something in, and then you can light up the room or light up the world, right? So you
Mhm.
are that outlet, right? What are you going to plug into so that you can enlighten other people and enlighten the world? So our positional power is our role or and title. Personal is our communication skills and everything else. Relational power is forming coalitions, it's alliances, it's leveraging your network, right? So a lot of times people will ask me a question, I say, I have no idea, but let me check with Eduardo, or let me check
Mhm.
with Peter, or let me check with someone else, right? If I have access to their brains, then I have
Mhm.
that power and that influence. So I may not know, but instead of saying no, no, I don't know, but no, but I can help you find out, then I have power, I have authority, I have influence. I'm seen as a subject matter expert or thought leader through the people I know and my access to other people. People contact me and say, "Oh, I see you're connected to so and so on LinkedIn. Can you introduce me?"
Mhm.
That is perceived as power, right? Because you have the power of
Mhm.
influence. So it's not just any one of those things; it's all three, and then
Mhm.
each of those three buckets has three subcategories in it that I won't go into now. But the key thing, as with everything we're talking about, these are all developable skills. If you
Mhm.
have a model or framework, then it'll help us to simplify complexity and say, all right, this is what I'm missing, or this is where I'm falling short. Tell me how I could boost this to the next level.
I love it so much. And I do have a question for you. When I think of social capital, and I'm curious, is social capital related to relational power?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the people you know, your access to information or connections or having influence, and yeah, it all falls into that. Your LinkedIn network, all of these things, your personal brand, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's all about your interactions and relationships with other people
Mhm.
that you can leverage and be a resource to as well.
So it makes me think of teachers in school. So my coaches and leaders, right? You're leading your teachers, thinking about what teachers have relational power.
Mhm.
Who has lots of friends and influence over other people, right? If you're trying to make a change in a school, can you get, a few very, teachers that have a lot of relational power in the school on board with you, right? To make that change, to build momentum and make that change sustained, really.
Yeah, it could be someone who has a relationship with a writer at the New York Times, someone who can
Mhm.
get you onto a podcast, someone who, by
Mhm.
joining forces, you could put a panel event together, right? So
Mhm.
it's basically leveraging our relationships.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
love yeah, yeah, it's really great. I love that. Okay, now I want to move into another one, your cycle of learning and development. I'm going to open up my book here that's
Ah,
right next to me because I want to read from it. Your framework has here's the book. This is for
ah,
everyone watching. Here we go.
thank you for the visual.
Um, it has four quadrants to it: behavioral, emotional, developmental, and intellectual. And you talk about, terms of learning and development as a cycle, right? It's not like
Mhm.
a line, it's a cycle. And you say to keep the wheel turning, you would need, a cycle of learning, you would need all four of these. Is it accurate to say to be ready? Like, is readiness an aspect of all four of these?
Yeah, readiness definitely factors into the first one, the upper right
Hmm.
quadrant. So the
Okay.
emotional component, you have to be emotionally ready to learn, willing to
Mhm.
learn. If you think you already know this stuff, or you're the smartest person in the room, or you're burnt out, you're not emotionally equipped to take in new information, right? Because when we
Mhm.
learn, we're adding another branch to our tree of knowledge, right? So we
Mhm.
already know stuff and we're adding to it. But if you don't have a positive emotional state, it's not going to happen, right? So that's the first step. Then is the intellectual. We need to take in that knowledge cognitively, right, and process it and see where it fits within our previous knowledge. The developmental component is basically putting that knowledge into practice and trying it out and getting feedback or coaching sometimes and doing things through trial and error. And then the last one is behavioral. Once you solidify something within you, then it becomes part of who you are and how you do things. And you got to keep that wheel turning because you need to maintain that emotional readiness. You need to continue to add new knowledge. So as soon as you say, I already know everything, the wheel stops turning. And then one of my sayings is that the true value of knowledge is not in its accumulation, but in its application, right? So if you don't keep learning, if you don't keep applying what you
I like
learn,
it.
then you become stale and outdated. That's why I keep, for people who watch, I keep this dinosaur on my desk, which reminds me to not go extinct, right? When you've been around for a long time, it's very easy to just exist based on what we already know and stop learning. But when new technologies come along, or AI, or different learning methodologies, we need to keep learning and trying and reinventing ourselves. Otherwise, we become stale, and then we lose our interest and we lose our sense of passion and purpose. So that's why we got to keep that knowledge turning.
Yeah, no, it's really great. I love that. And for my coaches and leaders listening, thinking through this could be a great model in terms of if an educator you're working with is stuck and you keep working with them and they're not making progress, this could be a good place to look to identify, is one of the quadrants missing, right? Is there a lack of, I'm saying readiness, but around, or development around any of these quadrants, and could that be a place to differentiate support?
Yeah, that's a great insight. It's definitely a valuable diagnostic tool to figure out,
Mhm,
instead of saying this person isn't learning or they're stagnating,
mhm,
let's look at the
mhm,
4 boxes or 4 quadrants and say, where are they stuck,
mhm,
right?
exactly.
And how can we get that wheel turning again? So
Yeah.
that's a great point. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, good. All right, we're moving to another piece.
Yeah.
So I want to
This is
talk
like a
about,
game show.
this
Name the next
is
model. Yes.
so much fun.
Mhm.
I want to talk about the delegation decision making matrix.
Okay.
And here you have, what do you call that? Like you have quadrants, but they're a bit different. There's two axes. One of the axes is the task importance or complexity, whether it's high or low, right? Is the task high importance, or high complexity or low? And then the other axis is task frequency, how often we're doing it. Is it high or low? And the four categories, I guess, if it's high task importance or complexity and low task frequency, it's do it yourself. If it's low task importance and low task frequency, it's dump or distribute. And then if it's high task importance and high task frequency, you want to develop and deputize, right? Develop other people. And then the last one is high task frequency. It happens often, but low importance, you want to delegate that. So I'd
Mhm.
love you to share more about this.
Yeah. Of all the models, this is the most challenging. That was a great job of explaining, by the way, because it's hard when you're not looking at it. But what's
Mhm,
interesting, just to hit the pause button for a second, is visual thinking very often is about looking at something, but also a lot of times it's taking in information through our ears, right? So we
mhm,
think
mhm,
visually. So you did a great job of describing the matrix. This is one of the more complicated ones. But the bottom line about this model is, sometimes as leaders we don't know when to delegate and when to do it ourselves, or sometimes we feel like we're dumping on other people. Is this a developmental opportunity, or is this something we're just trying to get off our plate? So
mhm,
the power of this model is just thinking about, for any given task, what should I do, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
something like, if something's a one-off and it's complicated, then just do it yourself, right? It'll
mhm,
take me longer to explain it to you, and especially if it's a high risk or high value, we don't want a mistake happening. So sometimes it's better I'll just do it myself. So I could do it myself in a half hour, or it'll take me a half hour just to explain it to you, and who knows if it'll be done right. However, if it's something that needs to be done long term over and over again, then it might be worth my time to invest in you and training you and delegating and coaching you through it, so that I could then deputize you, or give this to you, and from there you could run with the ball going forward. So that's why I say, if it's a one-off thing, so if there's little frequency, don't delegate it, just do it yourself. If it's highly important and complex, then you need to invest a little more time and effort into whoever you're giving it to. So a lot of times when delegations fail, it's not necessarily because the person was incompetent or whatever. It's just because we chose the wrong one for that
mhm,
particular situation. So I'll leave it at that, because it could get really
mhm,
complicated. But that's one of the
mhm.
more tricky ones, but a lot of managers say, yes, this really helped me to think through what to do with any given situation and who to give something to, right? We tend to
Yeah.
do our A players all the time, but then we
Mm-hmm.
overload them and then they
Mm-hmm.
slip to B players because they
Mm-hmm.
have so much on their plate, while someone else maybe has high potential to take on greater responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't go to that person because we know they need a little more coaching. But if we invest that time in them, then they're the next generation A player. But we need to be very strategic about it. I think that's the key takeaway here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that matrix really helps people be strategic.
Yes.
Okay, the next we're leaping
Yeah.
again to another model here. This is called the 5 levels of proactivity. I I'm really interested in your explanation of this. The matrix has 2 axes again. There's the level of proactivity from, I guess, low to high, and then time. I'm assuming from low to high as well, how much time it
Yeah.
takes. And I would love you to, it is highly visual, so I would love you to kind of explain, and I'll actually show it for everyone watching the YouTube here. This is what it looks like. What tell us about this matrix.
Sure, sure. The short version is, when something happens, like there are things that are needed in our world. Now, we could be inactive, which is we don't do anything and hope it goes away or hope someone else will do it. Reactive is we respond, but when you respond and when you're reactive, you're always a step behind, which is fine if it's one thing, but when it's 3 things and 5 things and 10 things, all of a sudden you find yourself drowning, right? If you're always in catch-up mode, you never get ahead and then the quality suffers. Active is when you respond in real time. Proactive is when you're thinking and anticipating a step ahead, so you're prepared when things come along. So when someone says, "Oh, I need this from you, Becca," and you say, "Oh, I already did it, and I just sent it to you," right? How does that make you look? You're on the ball, you're sharp, you're anticipating. There, you're proactive. And super proactive, level 5, is you're thinking not just 1 or 2 steps ahead, but 3 to 5 or 10 steps ahead. You're anticipating. Let's say you're working in the middle of the semester right now. You're thinking about what are we going to do next fall, right? In
Mhm,
the next academic year. So
mhm,
we always wait, again, till we're ready. We never get around to anything, right? There's a saying that
mhm,
which can be done at any time will most likely be done at no time, right? So you need to put
mhm,
it on your calendar. You need to figure
mhm.
out, is
Yes.
this is this a, and if anyone's familiar with the 4 box time management matrix, which is not in my book because it's not, all the models in my book are original models, my own original models. But if you know the Eisenhower matrix, quadrant 2 are those strategic, forward-looking things that we often don't make the time for because we're so busy in the day-to-day or dealing with interruptions and distractions. So that's another thing. When you use different models in combination, they're more powerful than any one model. But that's the secret to my 5 levels of proactivity, is if you're aware of the fact that you're always a step behind, what can you do? How can you block out some time to, it could be creating a template, it could be leveraging new technology, it could be having a conversation with someone, but you always want to be, if you could be more proactive. In fact, in the 7 habits of highly effective people, Stephen Covey's
Mhm,
habit number 1 is be proactive, right? That's how
mhm.
important it
Yeah.
is, the number 1. So if you could be more proactive and stay a step ahead, you'll be much more effective, productive. It makes you look more on top of things. And then as a leader, you want to start thinking about how can they be more super proactive and thinking 3 to 5 steps ahead. So that's a summary of what the model's all about.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great, right? So if you're a leader or a coach listening and you find yourself being like, "Oh, I guess I put out a lot of fires," right? Like a
Yeah,
lot of my job is, and this is work that I do with school leaders as well. It's when I say, what's going on, right? And they're sharing that they're putting out a lot of fires. The first thing I do is get them into the proactive much more than the reactive. So I love even just highlighting that and acknowledging, ooh, if I'm putting out a lot of fires, I'm being much more reactive. Let me learn skills and strategies to be more proactive.
exactly. And I love the metaphor you use because I always talked about, are you putting out fires or are you doing fire prevention, right? If you
Yeah.
anticipate what is the cause of fires, you're going to have
Mhm,
fewer fires to put out, right? So again,
mhm,
that's the proactive. If you work in a hospital emergency room, your job is to deal with emergency patients. But if you're a hospital administrator, you want to make sure you're equipped for those emergencies when they happen. That's not the time to
mhm,
start scrambling and say, what do we need in terms of, you know, personnel or equipment or whatever. You want to anticipate and think what might be necessary based on a variety of factors. Same thing in the school, right? You have your academic year, every industry has its calendar or its cycles. So we need to think ahead and what's expected.
mhm. Yeah. I love that. So, this is the last framework I want to talk about, and it's I loved this because I think the leaders and coaches listening are really gonna relate to this. So, this is called the hierarchy of followership. And you say this at the beginning, the title is in the chapter, the hierarchy of followership. Is it more important to be liked, admired, respected, or trusted? And I was like, ooh, this is good. What a good question to ask. So I would love you to share. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah. Well, ideally, we would all like to be liked and loved, admired,
Uh-huh.
respected, and trusted. But when it
Yeah.
comes to leadership, there are some times that we need to make decisions that people may not like or people may not like us for. But if they respect us and they trust us, they will follow us, right?
Hmm.
So there's some people, because I pose to my students sometimes the question, can you like someone you don't trust and can you trust someone you don't like? So it's kind of like, oh, like
Mm,
there might be someone say, I love hanging out with this person, but if I lent them $20, I know I'm never going to see it again, right? I don't trust
mhm,
that they're going to pay me back. Or there's some people you make an appointment with, you trust that they're going to show up, and other people it could be 15 minutes before, and they're going to be, and they end up being late or not or forgetting, right? So it's like, do you like someone? That's the personal aspect. That's the relational part. Admire is like, what is it about this person that I really appreciate? Respect is basically, do I respect what this person does? That has to do with someone's values. And trust has to do with accountability. Is their word their bond? Can you rely on them? So it's about reliability and responsibility and accountability. So ideally, we want all four of those things,
mhm,
but sometimes we try, especially new leaders, tend to try so hard to be liked that they could actually end up losing the respect and trust of
mhm,
people because they're trying to
mhm,
please everyone or they're indecisive. And if you tie this back to the CAP model we started out with, confidence, assertiveness, and presence, it may diminish someone's presence or your confidence in them if you don't have that trust in them. So again,
mhm.
that's an example of tying two models together to go, and that light bulb goes off and say, wow, I never thought about it that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think it's a really interesting chapter. I highly recommend folks reading it. So this has been such an interesting conversation, Todd. Thank you so much for sharing. All these little tidbits from your book. I highly recommend folks grab the book, read it. There's lots of visuals, which I personally love. So, Todd, how can folks find you if they're interested in reaching out or learning more about what you do?
Sure. The best way is just go to my website, toddcherches.com, and it's CHERCHES. And there you can find my TED Talk on the power of visual thinking and information about my book and what I do. My company is called Big Blue Gumball, and our motto is making the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to us, everyone's a leader. So those are the two best ways. But just definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Just say, hey, I saw you on Beckett's show. I listened to your conversation. And because I'm always posting things related to learning. I do a lot of faculty development work at NYU. So I'm always posting things related to leadership and learning. So connect with me on LinkedIn and check out my website. My book is available on Amazon and wherever else you get your books.
And I actually want to offer something to the listeners, and I just had this idea. So, Todd, I hope you're okay with this. I'm going to put a form, a little survey in the show notes. And if you'd like to learn for us to expand on any of these topics that we touched on, to maybe have a whole episode on one of them, because I know there's a whole world on each one. Feel free to fill out the survey. Let us know what topic you'd like to know more about, and we can hop back on and chat much deeper about one of them. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds amazing. Yeah, there's so much packed in and so much we
Yeah.
could probably talk for hours and hours, but this
Yeah,
was a tip
exactly.
of the iceberg survey that hopefully will I always talk about the Baskin Robbins little pink spoon, right? Why do they give away free taste? Because they want you to buy the cone and the whole gallon. Hopefully this was a good little pink spoon taste of what visual leadership is all about. But thank you for having me on, Becky.
Yeah, thank you.